Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for the ELCOM and EFOX webinar. Web accessibility, when is it a priority? Today our presenters are Tom Smith. Tom is VP of Worldwide Sales and Business Development at EFOX, and myself, Josh Anstey. I'm VP of Partner Engagement here at ELCOM. There's some great snapshot photos of Tom and myself who will be running through the webinar. Now, before we do jump into the fantastic content that we've prepared for you today, just a few housekeeping items to run through. So firstly, on the right-hand side, you'll see a questions panel. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type those into the panel on the right-hand side, and we'll do our best to answer the questions. We do have some time scheduled for Q&A at the end of the webinar, so if there are any questions, type them in there as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. Throughout the webinar, you can tweet to ELCOM and EFOX over there and join our social media pages. So let's jump into the webinar today with some introductions. Who are we and what should you be expecting today in the content we'll be covering? I'll give you a quick overview, just a bit about ELCOM, who we are. We're a global enterprise web content management solution provider. We've built the elcomCMS. We have global offices in New York, San Francisco, and Sydney, Australia, as well as a global partner network. The core product is the elcomCMS, and that's implemented for a range of different solutions from websites, intranets, portals, mobile, social, training, e-commerce, and online marketing. And that's all deployed through over 100 modules out of the box. We've got a fantastic close partnership with EFOX, and that's who we're presenting our webinar with today. I'll hand over to Tom to give you a quick overview about EFOX and then jump into the webinar.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning and good afternoon. This is Tom Smith. In regards to EFOX, EFOX is a company that was founded in 1999 on a very simple premise of trying to make the creation of web content easier. And so we've specialized for all those years in an online rich text HTML editor. We are headquartered in Palo Alto, California, with offices in the UK and Australia. We've been fast-growing and recognized by Inc. magazine as a highly fast-growing company in Silicon Valley. And we've got a partnership with ELCOM for several years now, and it'll become evident how we work together as we go through the slide deck. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to talk a little bit about what this accessibility space or scene is all about. There are a variety of perceptions. Some are accurate, some are not. We'll talk about why accessibility is important. We'll relate that to typical web priorities that most companies or entities that are involved with web creation see as a priority. We'll look at how they correlate with accessibility and really talk a little bit about things that can help make accessibility a priority. And then finally, and really most importantly, what are the steps to go through in order to achieve accessibility? And that's where we'll do a demonstration of the product. So as you'll see on the next slide, we're going to start out with a quick poll to get an idea from the audience of where are you on the accessibility journey?
Fantastic. So I'm just going to launch that poll now. So if everyone could please jump to their screen over there and quickly answer some questions over there. Where are you on the accessibility journey? So you'll see over there we've got a few different options for you to jump in over there. We are considering it, we are actively researching, we have a strategy, we are currently implementing, we have an accessible site. So everyone could please jump in there. We're getting some fantastic responses. Give about another 5 seconds or so before we close off this poll. Fantastic. It's good to see some of these votes coming in. All right, great. We're going to close off the poll over there. Now, what we're going to be doing throughout the webinar is we will be asking a range of different poll questions as we go along. And when we do ask those questions, we're going to be getting those results and collating those results for you. And we'll then be sharing those results with you in the follow-up email that you'll receive, which is going to have the recording of the webinar as well as the webinar slides. So all those results are going to be shared for you as we go along. I'll hand back over to Tom now.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Now, one of the interesting things I just want to share is we spend a lot of time talking to customers about creation of web content, about accessibility, and often when I ask the question about where accessibility lies in the priority scheme, I get a couple of reactions. One is a misunderstanding of what we mean by accessible web content, and in other cases, a thought of, well, would blind people really go to my website? And so as you'll see in the next slide, what we're really trying to illustrate here is that when we think about accessibility, there's been a perception of accessibility is purely related to disability. And in some regard, it certainly is, because people who are, let's say they're sight impaired in some fashion, they require an accessible website to get access to the content. But it's really more about the universal design, or also known as inclusive design. I think about my 79-year-old father who has a little bit of a shaky hand, and so for him to use a mouse and get it over a little bitty button is pretty hard. You may have people who are, they're using a stick or a pointer in order to access a keyboard. They can't use a mouse. And so we talk about accessibility. Certainly it is going to benefit those who are sight impaired, but we find more and more, and the demographics I'll show you indicate that, it really just means making a website universally available and much easier for the entire population. So on the next slide for global trends, there's a couple of, think of them as regulatory reasons to focus on accessible web content. And this is certainly important. There's the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. There's the W3C, WCAG guidelines, which are really global accessibility guidelines for web content. And then U.S. Section 508, that's really the United States Accessibility Guidelines. And so while these guidelines have been around for quite some time, governments are increasingly enforcing these guidelines. Recent lawsuits, there have been one a few years ago against Target. There was a recent one against Netflix. There are universities that have been faced with litigation because they haven't had compliant websites. So part of it certainly is to be compliant. But as you'll see in the next slide, one of the reasons is litigation avoidance. And while that's important, and certainly from a risk perspective is one reason to have accessible web content, as important, if not more so, is really the inclusive design, making the web available for all people. Now, this really doesn't matter if you're a government entity, you want to provide social services to the citizens within your jurisdiction, or from a private sector perspective, a company would typically want to enable its employees to get access to web content, and more importantly, to be able to access, give accessibility to the general population who would be the end users. Now, a lot of question comes up about, well, the reason we don't do that or don't concern ourselves with accessibility is we don't think the sight impaired people are our target market. And well, when you think about it from someone who is completely blind, that often is what comes to mind. But if you realize with Facebook, for example, Facebook color scheme was created because Mark Zuckerberg is colorblind, and that's an accessibility consideration in web design. So one of the reasons they're not in the target market, often there's not enough resource. There may be a requirement or a governmental guideline, but there's not enforcement, not a priority, or really that it's too hard. And candidly, if you're trying to make a website accessible purely by coding HTML, it can be a challenge. But we'll show you today through Josh's demonstration how we can make it fairly easy. Now, the other thing we wanted to share with you in global trends is really demographics. And this is where, when we talk to marketing people, it really starts to open their eyes. The World Health Organization has identified that 15% of the world's population lives with a disability. Bringing it closer to home in the United States, the Department of Labor indicates that 20% of the U.S. population will be over 65 in the year 2030, experiencing some level of impairment. So that may be getting a little shaky. Maybe it can't use a mouse. It could be that they have to use a screen reader. But there's a growing population in the U.S. who are entering that age bracket. But at the same time, even if I think about my father, he's got the discretionary resources to shop online, to invest online. He's got the time to do so. So you really don't want to exclude that market. And the statistic that's probably the most interesting is that Microsoft did a poll In the United States, they found that 74 million computer users have some level of impairment, and a significant amount of those are using some level of Microsoft accessibility technologies, where it could be the text-to-speech. It could also be just using the Zoom capabilities. So we're going to have a poll. Josh, if you would run the next poll.
Fantastic. So we're going to run a poll now, which leads right off what Tom's been talking about. So I'm going to launch that over there. And the poll we've got up there on your screen is, in your opinion, why would accessibility not be a priority for an organization? So this might be relevant to some people that haven't yet considered it or have just started considering it, and you can look back at reasons why it wasn't considered in the past. So if everyone could just quickly jump in there and answer that question, that poll question, in your opinion, why would accessibility not be a priority for an organization? And the 5 options we have is not in target market, no resources, no requirement, not a priority, or too hard. So we've got some great votes coming in there. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll give you about 10 more seconds to jump in and vote there. And again, as mentioned earlier, we're going to be sharing all these results with you in the follow-up email that's going to have the webinar slides as well as the webinar recording. And we'll have all these different poll results. All right, I'm going to close off that poll over there. Thank you very much, everyone, for jumping in and voting on this one over there. A final few little votes coming in there. Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone, for jumping in and voting on that poll over there. All right, I'll hand back to Tom now.
Great, thank you. And we'll go on to the next slide here. Here's what becomes really fascinating is as we talk to people around the world about accessibility, there's varying levels of interest. And for all the reasons that we've talked about thus far and we just polled is not a priority, or there's a lack of awareness, or don't see the market opportunity, the need. And while that's all well and good, when we transition the conversation to things that are more typical web priorities, which you see on the screen here, things like search engine optimization, mobility really referring to making web content available on mobile devices, whether it's an Android, an iPhone, a Samsung, a tablet of some fashion. Most customers that we talk to, they care about the user experience, they care about the user engagement, and they really want that loyalty. And by loyalty, we're really referring to repeated usage of that website. So if it's a business, certainly they want customers to come back and to buy product or gain support. If it's a public sector entity, by loyalty, it really refers to we want to try to make it as easy for self-service as possible. For example, the state of Colorado is heavily focused on a citizen engagement portal that will enable citizens to do much of their interaction, perhaps not all, but much of it, over the web. So these are things that are typical web priorities. And as we'll talk about on the next few slides, they dovetail very tightly to accessible web content. So let's look at the next poll.
Fantastic. And just before we do jump in cover those, we're going to ask our third and final poll over there. Just in terms of the typical web priorities that Tom's just mentioned, we're quite interested in which of the following is actually a priority for you. So we're going to launch our third and final poll over here. And if you could please just jump in there and quickly vote. We'd be interested in understanding which of the following is a priority for you: SEO, mobility, user experience and engagement, lead generation and sales, or brand strength. And Tom's going to be talking through these in a little bit more detail as we close off this poll. But just before we jumped in there, before we've provided that fantastic information, it'd be great if you could just jump in there and vote, and we'll keep the voting open for about another 10 seconds or so. We're getting our last couple of votes coming through right now. All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for voting on those. The third and final poll there. Again, these will be shared with you in the follow-up email you'll receive. That will have the webinar slides as well as the webinar recording. And we'll also have the results from the different polls that we've run so far today. So I'll hand over back to Tom now, who's going to be covering each of these different points.
Great. Thank you, Josh. So search engine optimization, this is something that I've yet to find a customer or a web entity, web group that I speak with who doesn't care about SEO. And this is where it starts to correlate with accessible web content, because search engines, they're blind. They can't look at the web, the screen on the computer, much like many of us can. So search engines will find content based on headings, alternative text tags, captioning, friendly URLs, meta tags, etc. This line aligns very directly because, for example, to insert an image into a website and make it accessible, the creator has to add a alternative text, which instead of saying file 12345.jpg, it's picture of a horse, picture of a building, picture of a product, whatever it ends up being. Those alternate tags give search engines more information to find content on your website. And so there's a very direct correlation that when websites are made accessible, search engine optimization increases by anywhere from 15 to 30%. And so, again, the website becomes found more frequently by the search engines. When we move on to mobility or mobile device access, this again, and this is in particular for the commercial side, but we see it also in the public sector, where there's a desire to make web content available on any device, any portable device, a tablet, a smartphone, for example. And so while that is often a very high priority, what's interesting is that when you make a website accessible, the accessibility guidelines overlap the mobile web best practices by about 80%. So if you're an accessible website, you're almost there from a mobile website. Now, in the case of user experience and engagement, when we talk to customers as well as we look at the industry reports, one of the main things that companies are concerned about today is having as good a user experience as possible. And so, whether it's in the design of the website, the ease of finding information, the ease of entering information, we've all tended to lose patience and lose tolerance for poorly designed websites. And so whether they're companies dealing with content management platforms or learning management platforms or social media platforms, they all care about how do we optimize the user experience. What's interesting is that when you have an accessible website, which at its very core makes content available to the sight impaired, it also makes it a much more easy to navigate website for those of us who have our sight and maybe do not have impairments. So on the next slide here, and this is really, I'd say, purely on the commercial side, sales and lead generation. Now, the accessible websites, they expand the markets, and what obviously comes to mind is, okay, people who are sight impaired can now access my website and get information, or they can access the website and they can buy something. But we need to expand our thinking that it's not just those who are sight impaired. It could be those who are missing a limb. They have to use a joystick, or they have to use a stylus or some fashion of using a keyboard. They can't use a mouse. So it really tends to open up the markets. And again, when you look at companies who have made their websites accessible, they typically will get a substantial increase in the number of leads and the resulting business as well. And then the last one we'll talk about here is really on the brand equity side. And this is one where it ties a lot to the litigation. For example, the government of Ontario was successfully sued because their websites, their internal websites were not accessible. Target was successfully sued. Disney was sued, I believe it was last year. Netflix was sued by the Federal Communications Commission. And so there's a lot of times where not only is there legal risk and there's financial impact of experiencing those lawsuits, it also starts to impact the brand. But when you look at Target, for example, you question, why didn't they respond to the advocacy groups who asked them to make the websites accessible, rather than go through a lawsuit, be fined millions of dollars, and then still have to spend the money to have an accessible website? So it's a way of not only expanding markets and increasing SEO and leads, it also can limit the legal risk and also improve the value of the brand. So with that, we're going to move on to taking action. So there's a couple things here in terms of accessibility being a priority. we find more and more customers are saying, yes, we now realize there's more enforcement, there's more value in doing it, there's more overlap with SEO, but there's still a couple of things that come up with reasons of why not to make it a priority. And these are ones we started out early on. The ones we really focus on with the demonstration is really the part about being too hard. Because when we get into the demo, you'll see that for the most typical accessibility errors, it's actually pretty easy with the tool sets that we put together. So with that, we're going to take a pause and turn over to Josh to do the demo, and he'll illustrate to you how we can actually help to make content accessible.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tom. There's some really fantastic information over there, and definitely a lot to consider and digest. But appreciate you running through all of that. So I'm going to jump in and do a quick demo of some functionality with the editor and the elcomCMS to show you how you can actually run reports and ensure the content you're creating is accessible. So that little screenshot over there, we're going to run a report that's quite similar to that. So I've got my demo site up on the screen over here, and I've also got a page of content which I've created already. Now you'll notice over here in this page of content that I've got in Microsoft Word, I've got a link, I've got an image in the document over there, I've got some different headings, I've also got a table over there and some bullet points and other information. Now, what I want to show you is, I'm going to be showing you two pieces of functionality over here. The first is actually the elcomCMS and the Microsoft Office integration, where you can actually publish content straight from the elcomCMS, from Microsoft Word into the elcomCMS. I'm going to be showing you the eFox Edit Live Editor and then how you can run the different accessibility reports to ensure that you're completely compliant over there. So as I've mentioned, we work really closely with eFox. The elcomCMS uses the eFox Edit Live Editor, and it does offer a unique accessibility check as you type content, in addition to when you publish content from Microsoft Word or content that is already checked in Microsoft Word. The tool is an online tool, and it's going to check the proper structure, the text, the alt text, and table accessibility on a cell-by-cell basis. There's also a table accessibility wizard for a user to correctly create accessible tables. So let's take a closer look, and I'm actually going to give you a demo of this right now. So in this page of content over here, it's pretty common, as I'm sure you're all very familiar with those that do publish content on their websites, intranets, and portals or learning solutions, that the content is typically created in Microsoft Word at the beginning. So I've simulated that scenario over here, and there's different elements in the document. And at the top over here, I've got the elcomCMS connector. And I'm going to connect over there and authenticate to a certain site that I'm using right now, a demo site. So I've authenticated to the demo site over there, and I'm actually going to publish this content straight into the elcomCMS, into my demo folder that I have over there. It automatically creates a page title over there, and I'm going to give it a brief description. I'm just going to call this accessible content in the elcomCMS. So that's the brief description I've put in there for the page of content that I'm publishing from Microsoft Word into the elcomCMS, and we're then going to be actually running some accessibility reports using the eFox Edit Live Editor. Now, what I've done when I've created this as well is I've created this intentionally to create some errors when we run the report, because I want to run the report and show you how fantastic the report is in actually picking up different errors and identifying them and helping you resolve those errors over there. So I'm going to publish this now to the demo site that I have set up over there, which is this page of content. And it's going to authenticate myself through Active Directory over there, and it's going to publish it straight to the elcomCMS. And the browser window is going to open, and it's going to actually publish my page of content over there. And as you can see, I've got my title, which was part of the template. It's picked up the brief description I put in there, accessible content in the elcomCMS. And you'll notice over here I've got some of the content and the images and the table and the bullet points. And it's picked up that styling from the style sheets that were already on this template that I published to. So I actually want to jump in now and show you the editor. So if I go into the advanced editing in the elcomCMS, and I have my elements of content over here, I'm going to jump into this content editor to actually look at the content and edit it. I'm going to go over here and select the eFox editor. and I'm going to change over here to use the eFox editor to actually edit this content. Now, as mentioned, when I created this content in Microsoft Word and published it through the elcomCMS, I've created it so that it can pick up a few different issues and errors over there, so I can actually run the report and show you how detailed that report and the analysis actually is over there. So in the eFox editor, there's a whole range of fantastic features over here that you can use. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, so I'm just going to touch on one or two. The main one over here, as you can see, is the Enable Accessibility as you type. Now, if I click that over there, when I scroll through my page over here, if there's something that's not accessible and there's an issue that's been picked up, you'll see I get a little alert over here on the side. And if I mouse over, it's actually going to identify what different accessibility codes and standards it is not compliant with or there are issues with, and it's going to give me some more information around what I need to do to actually resolve that. With the image over here, there's a range of different options. I can actually do a lot of image editing over here, but I'm not going to go into that today. And the image over there currently has alt text. So if I go into look at the code over there, you'll see the image has alt text, and so there's no issue there with the image. You'll also notice publishes clean HTML from the elcomCMS Microsoft Office connector. So I've currently got my accessibility as you type enabled. And if I go over here to the tools, I can actually run an accessibility report. And this is going to run a report on the page of content I've published here. And what you'll notice is that I've created a page that's going to bring up a whole bunch of different areas that are going to get flagged. So I can actually show you how detailed the report is that's going to be run. So if you're creating content, and obviously the big issue we've identified is a lot of people say it's too hard and maybe it takes too much time, or it's an issue, you don't know what's going to be accessible or not. The eFox Edit Live Editor is actually going to run that check for you and help you correct that. Along the top over here, you can actually see you can target different guidelines, and you can select which ones are the ones you want to look at specifically. So you might be selecting different guidelines over here based on countries, regions, locations, content. There's a range of different variables over there. So as you can see over there, there's some fantastic accessibility features that if I've published content from Microsoft Word that I can jump in and run a report on to ensure that the content over there is completely accessible. Given the time constraints, I'm not going to run through and actually go through and fix those and show you how you fix those, but it's really easy for you to do that as a user. It doesn't require any technical knowledge whatsoever. It does ensure that you can be confident that content is published and it is accessible. Now, what I showed you was creating content from Microsoft Word and publishing it straight through to the elcomCMS. What I want to show you now is actually creating a brand new page of content from the beginning and keeping the accessibility check on as you type. So I'm going to jump over here and I'm going to add an article. And we're going to call this over here, we'll just call this Accessibility is Easy. So I've got a brief description there, and I'm going to be creating this inside the demo folder. I'm going to select a master page over here, and I'm also going to select a template. Just see how quick and easy it is to actually create the content over here in the elcomCMS, create a brand new page of content. And I've got my user-friendly URL. So I'm going to create that page of content over there, and you'll see based on the templates and the style sheets, I've already got my heading and my brief description of showing that. If I jump into the content editor over here, and we have a look over here, and we jump into the eFox editor to create some content, just like we were doing a moment ago, I'm going to create brand new content here from the beginning, but I am going to put on the accessibility checker so that as I type it provides some information around what I'm doing. So I'm going to jump over there, and as you can see at the top, I'm going to enable accessibility as you type. And over here, I'm going to call this one over here Accessible Content is Easy. I'll make that over there an H1 as well. And I'm also going to jump down here and I'll insert an image. I'm just going to search for an Elcom logo to put in the page over there. So you'll see there's the elcom logo. So I've very quickly created some content over here in a brand new page. As you can see, when I had the accessibility checker while I was typing, there's no issues that were determined at all. So I've created some nice content over here. I could look at the code over there and see it's nice and easy. And given this image over here already had the alt text, which Tom was talking about before, there weren't any issues there with that content that was created. The great thing about the editor over here is that it's completely accessible, including the menu and the icons up here. So as well as creating content that's accessible, you're also going to be using a tool that's completely accessible for your users throughout the organization. So that just wraps up some of the demo functionality I wanted to show you there. I just wanted to show you some of the great tools and the accessibility reports that you could run in action. As you can see there, there's some fantastic functionality with the eFox Edit Live editor that's tightly integrated into the elcomCMS. It makes it really easy for you to create and publish accessible content. I'm going to hand across now back to Tom, who's going to wrap up with a summary, and then we're going to open the floor for some questions and answers. We've got some great questions coming through, so if you do have any questions you've been thinking about, now is definitely the time for you to be asking those questions. Type it in the question box on the right-hand side, and we'll be answering those questions in just a moment's time. So I'll just hand over to Tom to do a summary of what we've covered so far.
Great. Thanks, Josh. A couple of things I wanted to point out on this slide is when we talk to users, the product tends to resonate pretty well, whether they're with content creators or with their support teams, because the people creating content can become more self-sufficient. There are other capabilities, like one of the most challenging things to make accessible is a table. And so Edit Live has built into it a wizard that can automate the creation of accessible tables. So there's a lot of things that it can do to help make not only the content accessible, but make it easier to do. The one that's most interesting is when we talk to developers, we often get the request, well, what's in this for me? Why should I care? Because they're not the content creators. And what we find is once people start using these type of tools, the support calls start to go down as well, because the users aren't stuck trying to create an accessible table, an accessible image, and have to turn to someone who's technical to get that result. So in summary, what we're seeing across the market is that accessibility is becoming much more of a priority, not only because of the increased enforcement of guidelines, but also from the viewpoint of a better understanding of how having accessible web content correlates with business value, as we talked before, whether it's mobility or it's the the mobility or the SEO or lead generation. One of the things that we do tend to recommend is that you don't have to do this all at once, because people who have not started down this path could easily become overwhelmed with all the different accessibility errors in their websites. So what we typically recommend is start small. Pick the things that are the most typical accessibility errors, things like alternate text tagging of images, things like tables and how they're created, fixed width tables versus relative tables. Some things that are easy ways to start that tend to train the users as they create content, so that it ends up becoming easier and easier over time. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Josh, and appreciate everyone's time today.
Fantastic. Thanks so much there, Tom. All right, there's some great questions coming in. So I'll ask a couple of the questions. There's some that I think that will be directed towards you, Tom, and there'll be some that might be directed towards my side. And we'll just try answer as many as we have time for. And then those that we don't get to, if we don't get a chance to actually ask and answer your question over here, we will definitely contact you directly to answer the question. So the first question I've got over here, how can I get the accessibility checking features in the elcomCMS? So it's a nice, easy answer to that one. The features we've shown you today is with the eFox and Edit Live editor over there, which is tightly integrated into the elcomCMS. So that's very easy for you to utilize. It's pretty much already built in there. So if you're using the elcomCMS or planning on using the elcomCMS, the features are there ready for you to actually use. Another question that's come through. Tom, this one's probably for you. What else does the Enterprise Edition come with?
It's a good question. We've been doing this for, roughly 13 years now. And so what you find with the Edit Live product is that many of the things that we tend to take for granted in Microsoft Word, like track changes or commenting, we've included those in the HTML editor, which makes things a whole lot easier when doing content quality reviews and such. There's also an image editor, whereas Josh showed how you can bring an image in and check it for accessibility. We also have the ability to resize that image, to resample it, to shrink down the file sizes, so a creative content contributor doesn't inadvertently put an 8-megabyte file on the website. You can automatically shrink that down. Things like hyperlink checking to make sure that there are no broken hyperlinks in the website. And probably most important, and it seems like it should be so basic, but the clean copy paste from Microsoft Word, so that what you copy from Word is what ends up in your HTML on the website without having to reformat and rebuild the HTML. So there's quite a few additional features that can provide value beyond the accessibility capabilities.
Great, thanks for that, Tom. And there's another question which came through, which I'll probably ask straight to you now, which you might have just covered in everything you've just talked about right now, and if there's anything else, maybe you want to add it. But the question was, what else does the eFox editor offer in addition to accessibility checking? So I know you've added a few points there. Are there any others you wanted to just add on there?
I guess there's one overarching theme is we've really focused, as we created our editor, just to make sure that it works, because the HTML editors are often prone to challenges, whether it's copy-paste or dealing with images, and we've been at this a long time, and so it's an editor that almost becomes frustration-free editing. So from capability perspective, there's spell checking, there's the thesaurus, there's, oh gosh, roughly 200 APIs, so if people want to do customization, they can do that very easily.
Okay, great. And there's one last question I reckon we'll take now, and then the others we'll try and get to everyone a little bit later on. We'll contact you directly to actually answer the additional questions. So there's quite a few coming through, so we won't get time to get through them all. The last question I want to ask, and this one's sort of been asked by a couple people, and so I'm going to sort of blend them into one question over here. The two different questions, or there's a few of them, but the two main ideas of this question that have come through. The one is, if we're a current customer of elcom and the elcomCMS, how can we upgrade to Edit Live? And the other question, which is, how can we get the eFox editor? So if you are a current customer and you'd like to be using the editor, please speak to your account manager. Contact elcom, and we can definitely talk to you about how you can upgrade to use the editor over there. If you are just interested in the editor as well, I'll be putting up both Tom and my details in a moment on the screen. You can be contacting us directly, and we'd be happy to provide any information that can assist you along that process. So we'll catch up with everyone individually in terms of the other questions we had there. We don't have time to go through them all, but thank you very much for those questions. So to wrap up the webinar over here, what's next? So essentially, you contact us. We'll talk about your requirements. We'll talk about accessibility requirements, mobile requirements, technology requirements, how we can help provide some information around best practices, talk about what some of your challenges are, and obviously talk about what are the next steps and how we can get you along the journey of accessibility. I have our contact details there on the screen. Thank you very much, everyone, for spending some time with us this morning, this afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. Really appreciate you joining us and learning a bit about web accessibility and understanding when it's a priority and what you can do to ensure that you're creating accessible content. If there are questions, please feel free to contact us, and we look forward to speaking to everyone and working with everyone soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.